Joining me today is an author and a professor of philosophy at Portland State University and a man who strives to be a good human every day. Peter Boghossian, welcome back.
It's great to be here, thanks, and thanks for the striving to be a good human. You'd never know it from what people have been saying about us recently.
Well, certainly about me.
How about you? You've really been through the ringer in the last few days, and I would love to get to that and talk about that.
I suspect we can get to that, but strives to be a good human being. The reason I threw that in there, because that seems to me, you were on the show about a year and a half ago. Right. We had never met before that. We've since become very good friends.
Very good friends. We hit it off instantly.
Yeah, just like that. And when you were on the show, and we'll link to it down below so that people can see the initial sit down, I felt that it was one of the episodes where so many of the things that I had been thinking about the left, about politics, about religion, and belief, so many of the things sort of all came together. They really did, and I felt richer after, and I do often in some interviews. Some interviews I feel dumber, but this was one where I felt richer, and since we've become friends. But you do strive to be a pretty decent
I do. It's interesting. You know, you said, how should I introduce you in the beginning? And I was thinking...
I don't ask that normally. The only reason I ask is because we're friends, and I thought maybe there's some personal little anecdote or something that you want to
and I really, I really just striving to be a good person. I think that that's one of the things that matters, that kindness, that compassion. I think we've so lost it in acrimonious. We're so hyper-partisan. And the college craziness and everything that's been going on is... And the attacks and people don't give you an opportunity to respond to those attacks and the negativity on social media. So, I'm just trying to be a good guy. I'm just trying to live a good life.
A good life. So in the last couple months, you lost your dad.
I did. That was one of the seminal events of my life.
How do you stay a good person throughout that? Not that losing someone's going to make you a bad person, obviously, but you're still trying to work. You're still trying to be a public person and to write. And like, how do you manage not just going nutty in the course of that?
And I had some health issues. I was in the emergency room 3 times in the last few months. I have Crohn's disease, so that's not doing me any favors either.
Without getting too deep, I mean, you were in the hospital today.
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted me to tell that to people.
No, that's fine.
You've had some stuff. You've had some stuff going on, but I think
I'm open about it. No, and I think that really does make every moment of your life precious. And when my dad died and my mom died, I don't know, it's a kind of a combination of feeling more circumspect, and I've always had in the back of my mind my parents' approbation, what my dad think or my mom think, and it's kind of really given me an opportunity to, I'm trying to frame it positively, it's trying to given me an opportunity to reflect on what they did for me in my life and try to do that for my kids. But when navigating that reality when your parents have died is very intense. It's very, even little things like you get in the car, you should always get in the car and just call my dad, or I call my mom, and I don't do that anymore. And I think one of that's why I was thinking today, I don't like the idea that someone passed. They're dead, they've died. There's a permanence to that and that language. And I am always thinking to myself, like, oh, my mom would like that, my dad would like that. And real quick, when my mom died, it wasn't really until her funeral that I understood that she died, like really grokked it, because someone fell asleep in her funeral. And I thought, God, my mom would think that's hilarious. She would love that. And then I realized, like, I could never tell her that. I could never tell her anything again. And those pillars in your life that you can't go to in times of joy, in times of stress. I was in the hospital for another time for my Crohn's disease. My dad stayed up with me all night. He was there. And that part of my life is gone now.
Yeah. So as a philosophy professor, and as a well-known and outspoken atheist, when you're challenged with something like the death of a parent, do any of your beliefs get challenged? I mean, is there a moment right after your dad passed where you thought, man, I want to believe, or did you maybe have a dream that seemed different, something like that? Because, you know my feelings on belief, and I'm not a believer in the traditional sense, and yet occasionally things happen that I go, what was that? After my grandma passed, who I was very close with, I had some very vivid dreams that seemed to me she was telling me something. Now, I'm not saying I buy it for all it is, but it has some value to me. Did you have any of that, or do you have any of that? Nothing.
No, I was just incredibly bereaved, and I was I mean, it was just a shattering of a type of reality for me. But it also made me realize that it really is true that every moment of life is precious. You just have to be so grateful, go through life with a sort of gratitude for the experiences that you have.
So when you hear someone like me that you know pretty well say, well, you know, my grandma passed away, and then, I mean, I could tell you about the dream. I was in her apartment. Yeah. She looked amazing. She was like glowing, and she was wearing all black, and she had these like green neon streaks in her hair, and she was like running in place really fast, and she was telling me how excited she is, and she has all these things to do. I mean, it was vivid and powerful and whatever. And so when you hear me say something like that, as a non-believer, what do you think of that?
I think it's totally normal and totally natural. I think different people grieve in different ways, and I think it was when my grandfather died, I had a similar experience. I had a hyper vivid dream about him. I think these moments in life, death, they give you a kind of clarity sometimes, but they also so for my dad, when he had died and I was holding my dad's hand at his death and my mom's hand at her death, so I was incredibly fortunate. You know, they saw me into the world and I saw them out of the world. I was just irreconcilable. I mean, I was a complete mess. I was sobbing, and the woman who comes in, the social worker, what have you, said, you know, normally we have grief counselors here, and normally I would suggest to say, but in your case, I really think you have to go see the grief counselor. Like I'm sending the grief counselor in. Yeah, and I think part of that was so hard for me is precisely because they don't have those metaphysical beliefs. Like, that's the finality. Like, that's it.
So then did you have moments through these? So you didn't, I guess you're saying. You really didn't have a moment where suddenly you thought, maybe I got this wrong, or I want to believe in something that I can't prove, but it's really that locked for you. Like,
oh no, it's not locked. I just never bartered my hope for anything. You know, I never.
That's a great line.
Oh, yeah.
Never bartered my hope for anything.
Yeah, it's true, though. I mean, I never... And then you go through the long... You know, I was living in his house, I was driving his car, I was wearing his clothes, because right after we did the event with Christina Hoff Sommers, the next day that I went out there to see him. But it was fortunate. And, you know, one thing that people really don't want to talk about, I think the left and the right has their own blind spots, but parenting, I am absolutely convinced, is a prophylactic to bad behavior, good parenting. And if you look at the data, kids are more likely to commit violent crimes if they're in a certain age group. I just read this, and I was reading Matt Thornton's manuscript about violence. And if they're males, and if there's no adult male present in the home. And just as the left doesn't want to acknowledge that and talk about that, so too does the right have particular blinders about structural inequality and such. But I think parenting and good parenting and being thoughtful and what that means. When I was driving down here, the Uber driver told me that, I'm not going to mention what country she was from. I like 50,000 emails. Well, you hate these people, and no.
Can you pick give me the same hemisphere?
Southeast Asia.
Okay, fair enough.
Was telling me that they come from a traditional family, and I asked, well, you know, why don't your kids go to see your ex? And she said, well, he used to spank them. And I thought, like, wow, I've never raised my hand to my children ever. I have raised my voice on occasion. I've never lost my temper. It doesn't speak to me. I think Denmark.
You've smacked me once or twice in an argument.
More than that. But that's the other thing. It's this idea about verbal violence. It's the idea. It's a complicated, but I think parenting, I think we've overlooked how important that is. Oh, one more thing since we're talking about this. I didn't plan on talking about this.
I have no plan here, Pete.
Yeah, the nurse said something really interesting to me. She said, I bet you he was a wonderful father to you. And I said, well, you say that to everybody. And she said, actually, no, I don't. I can tell by the way the kids treat their parents when they come to the hospital. And it was so sad. So I would walk into this hospital every day, and I would see all these people who were literally dying, and they were alone, and they had nobody. And it just made me, what a kind of a loneliness, you know?
Yeah. Is that the funny thing about non-belief, that you've so obviously had a transcendent experience, but it's all based in actually what happened? So a lot of times,
it's based in reality. Like, I had a father. He was a physical person. He lived in my home. He raised me. Oh, and this is the thing. So what did I do when my father died? After sobbing, and the first person I called was my childhood friend. Like, the next person who had known me for the longest time, and he cheered me up, and it was good. Or he tried to, you know.
That's connected to the family thing, don't you think? I've mentioned this a couple of times lately, that I think now at 41 next week, I've started to really understand, thanks, I've started to understand why the family thing is so important, and that I'm so proud that my parents have been married for 40 some odd years, and I still go home to the same childhood home, and my family friends are all still there. My best friend in the world is still the same guy that I met before kindergarten when we were 4 years old. That those connections have incredible value. That
They're totally, that's what, you know, what is the meaning of life? Well, you know, whatever you make the meaning of life be. But Aristotle talks about that, and here's what I would throw out to you and to the audience is that you can have the richest, deepest, most rewarding friendships if you are a person of virtue and the person with whom you're friends with is a person of virtue. Aristotle says it's the highest form of friendship between two virtuous people.
Yeah.
And you know, what does that entail? It really does entail a kind of Greeks call it parousia, speaking truth in the face of danger. So, and I've told you a few things, and you've told me a few things. Hey, I think you're wrong about this, or what have you. And if that is sufficient to decide that we're going to part ways, then either our friendship wasn't that strong in the first place, or I would like to think that we have the sort of relationship that we can be completely honest with each other, and even really, I wouldn't spare your feelings about something, frankly.
Yeah, which is what you want. I would expect, that's what true friendship is about.
And then I would expect that you would expect that I wouldn't spare your feelings, that I would just say, hey, look, man, this is how it is, you did this, and I have to say, and then whatever it was.
I was telling you about this right before we started, so without even saying the sex or name of the person, certainly, or anything like that, I got into a bit of a argument with a friend of mine, a public person, just yesterday, and we really got into it on the phone, and I made it clear, and I've done this a couple times lately, made it clear with people that even if we're apoplectically angry at each other, this is not going to end the friendship, at least for me.
Awesome.
And I feel that comes very easy for me to say that. It really does. And I don't know why that's so hard for other people to do, that we're so now willing, and maybe it is a social media thing and a short attention span thing or something, like we're so willing to just shred things that we've had.
Yeah, it lends itself to a really interesting question. What would be, since we're talking personally, if I may, what would be a deal breaker for a relationship? And I was at dinner with my family a few weeks ago, and my son, you've met my son.
Yeah, he's a great kid.
Almost always keep my family's names and stuff out. Started talking about one of the things he's learning about in school is gender and social constructs and sex changes. And he said to my wife, if Dad decided to become a woman, would you still be married to him? And my wife, without an instant of hesitation, said no. And both my children were flabbergasted by that. They couldn't, and then they kept pressing her, and she said, basically, you know, this isn't what I signed up for. And it just made me think, so what are the limits of friendship? Like, what would the limits of friendship, I mean, I can think of a few things.
Well, if I found out that you murdered somebody, that you were a cold-blooded murderer, or you had done something so duplicitous directly related to me.
Or even I would add, maybe even to someone else, or, I mean,
it doesn't have to be directly related.
We could make a scale, like, but what if I started filling my pockets when you were in the kitchen with grapes that I saw in the fridge?
Grapes. I told you you could have anything out of it.
I know, right? And the funny thing is, we'd have a relationship. I didn't ask. I was going to take it anyway.
You did just go.
Yeah. So, like, what if I went into your bedroom when you were gone and went through your drawers? Like, there are, you know, what those limits are different. But I'd suggest that it really comes down to virtue and trust, and those sorts of relationships give your life so much meaning and are so fulfilling and are so profound. They make for a life worth living. And that's, I think, what we need to put front and center in our lives. And even the stuff on addiction is fascinating. My wife's an addiction medicine doctor, and she gave this really interesting presentation about how one of the reasons that people become and stay addicts, and all the studies, and this is out of my area of expertise, but basically she does these studies on rat parks, and when rats are given wheels and fun things, you know, habit trails, or whatever rats like, they're much less likely to choose narcotics than if they're not. Mm-hmm. And one of those things is these relationships that we develop and we nurture throughout our lives. And I guess I would like to be the sort of person for whom being a person of integrity and virtue and having those deeply fulfilling relationships enhances my life and my friendship. And then when you call me and you say, hey, this is up, thanks for that. I appreciate you did this, and that was a massive dick move.
Yeah.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
So I know we've definitely talked about this privately, but I think we may have talked about it last time also, but I think it would be good to rehash. Sure. If someone does exactly what you just said, to find that virtuous life, but needs to do it through belief, but does the exact same thing, do you think that that is somehow still an inherent problem with the proper, not the proper way to be a human, but just, what's the problem then, if somebody does that?
Well, there are two issues with that. One is, what's the problem? Does that cause a problem with your relationship to somebody? So I have a friend who's, not only is he a hardcore Christian, he writes children's books trying to indoctrinate people into Christian. Phil Vischer, the guy from VeggieTales, he's become a very good friend of mine, texting and such.
So this shows you can be friends with someone.
You can, and I've confided in him about things, and I trust him, and I have told him in no uncertain terms, I think he's harboring not a misconception, but a delusion about the nature of reality. And we've had a civil talk. No one threw fisticuffs, we talk about that in the context of our friendship. But that wasn't sufficient for him to end, well, I never had any idea we were going to talk about this today. That wasn't sufficient for him to withdraw from the friendship or end the friendship. And that's a core belief. I mean, that's an antithetical belief to what I've devoted my professional life is to helping people think clearly and critically and overthrow dogma and ideology and morally motivated reasoning. But I think the problem with that is, it depends on what you want to have, what your relationship to truth wants to, what you think it should be. There would be something to me if somebody was friends with me, and a genuine friend and a virtuous friend, only because they feared that if they would not do that, they would go to hell. There would be something suspect in that for me.
But what if it wasn't that? What if they just had some belief? You know what I mean? Like, whatever
Zeus
it is. They just had some belief that you couldn't prove. Right. Okay, karma's a great one. So they just believed in karma. What they're going to put out there is going to come back to them. Thus, because of that, they become the virtuous type of person that you aspire to be.
It's a great question. I think I've shifted my stance on that over the years. I guess I'm having trouble with the question because I don't really think someone can truly be virtuous if they harbor beliefs based on a faulty epistemology.
Right. So we could sort of get lost in the definition of virtue then.
Right, but let's just say that's the case. The world would be better off and human flourishing would be contributed to if more people had this false belief view than if we resorted to this Hobbesian state. I guess the problem would be if they alone believe that and didn't try to institutionalize that. I think it would be less of a problem than I would have said even 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I think perhaps, and I'll watch the video again myself, I think you might have answered that a little bit differently last time, which shows a flexible mind. Do you ever fear that as a public person? You say things, you tweet things, you do interviews, you go on podcasts, all those things, that people are going to be like, you see, 2 years ago he said something else. And it's like, they just want to get you.
So that should, well, we really need to unpack that. Yeah, so that should be a virtue. It should be a virtue that you change your mind. I will admit, it's hard for me to admit, but it's true. It's so difficult when you're constantly under attack and constantly under siege to say, it's far more difficult not only to say I made a mistake, but like, look, I really thought about this, and then you get, that's why I've stopped reading my Twitter mentions or Facebook, and none of it, I don't read any of it anymore, because it's just so filled with hate and rage, and even if you look at the terms we use, the moral valence of terms have, like flip-flopping. Flip-flopping is a negative thing, like you change your mind, but you should change your mind. What if you're commander-in-chief and the situation on the ground changes, you didn't have access to that? Oh, he flip-flopped about troops in Iraq or about Guantanamo. Well, we live in a dynamic world where things are in flux and they change. But I have definitely found that being that sort of person who's not willing to change my mind, but the open admission of that on Twitter or Facebook has become more difficult as people ramp up their personal slanders and attacks.
Yeah, so I'm very aware of that.
And I'm dying to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
Dying to talk to you about what's been going on with you.
I've had some strange things going on. We'll get there in just one second.
Okay.
You also had another sort of attack on you. It was sort of similar to what I had on me. But I think you're really onto something there, that I don't think it's, if someone, sometimes people will say, well, you said this 3 years ago, or you used to believe this. They'll look at some of my tweets when I was a far left progressive.
Yeah.
And they'll go, you used to make fun of white people for this. And I go, yeah, you're not proving me. What are you trying to prove? You're proving that, yes, I evolved out of
you
something.
change your mind and you say, wow, this guy had took in information, and as a result, that's what rational people do.
That's what you're supposed to do. But you're also right about the other point, which is that when you're under attack from people, when you feel like everything you're going to say is going to be attacked, then you stop having those nice moments of mea culpas and contrition.
And you know what else you stop doing, which is interesting? You stop asking questions. And you might ask the questions yourself, but you don't want to articulate those questions, or you don't want to articulate those rebuttals, because you really don't want to receive 500 emails and shift through all of them telling you you're a shithead and you should go die and kill yourself, and people writing your name in the walls as a Nazi. So you stop doing that. I mean, like, to give you an example, this film I was in with Michael Shermer, Reasons to Believe, and I made a comment about pussy hats, these people having pussy hats, and I basically said, look, like, this is not the image you want to portray. And I got an unbelievable amount of just crazy talk about that. But one of the things I thought was, I almost said, I came so close to saying, do you think Martin Luther King would have been more respected or less respected if he had a pussy hat on? I mean, it would have been the perfect thing to say, but I didn't say it because I didn't want hundreds of emails and tweets about me being a racist. Yeah. So I think we're in a precarious situation right now, and I think Sam is getting this in crazy amounts, asking questions, opening conversations. We need to have those conversations. We need to ask those questions.
Yes. You're talking about Sam Harris.
Sam Harris, yeah. You had Charles Murray, even Gary Taubes, the guy who, the anti-sugar guy.
So what do you do then, if you were in my position or in Sam's position, when I see some articles written about it and say, well, Rubin talked to this guy or this guy or this gal, and they think this, and Rubin didn't ask them this, and all this stuff. And Sam gets this too, by the way. I mean, Vox did a pretty, really hatchet job misrepresenting what him and Charles Murray talked about.
Salon hit pieces.
And Slate just wrote something about you. We're going to talk about the conceptual penis shortly and what happened with Salon. But all of those things, they add up to us not having any more conversation. Because at some point it's just like, all right, well then I'll just talk to people. I'll just talk to it's not that I'll talk to people I agree with. I'll just talk to people who say nothing.
That's right.
Because then I've completely insulated myself, and no one will really.
So this is I think what we need to do. I think we need to figure out everybody. James Lindsay actually gave me this idea, and I think he's absolutely right. A co-author of The Conceptual Penis, The Social Construct. We need to figure out whose voice matters. Certain people matter, and in general, this hate and vitriol comes from the least accomplished people who, there's a really nice Nietzschean frame to talk about this. There's kind of oversimplified, but they're slaves. Their situation reality is they're slaves, and they discharge these primal urges on people. It's like the Australians have this term, tall poppy syndrome. When something grows high, you just cut it down. So as Rubin grows and subscribers and the Twitter, just cut Rubin down. Fuck him. Just cut him, that Nazi, white supremacist, homophobe.
Gay, married Jew, Nazi, homophobe.
Right.
It's so much. I know. It's so much, Pete.
It's overwhelming, but we have to figure out whose voices matter, and then we need to have those friendships of virtue. So when people come to us and say something, we can really listen. But the way to not do it is to look at, as you've said repeatedly, to look at an egg on Twitter. Yeah. It's probably a 12-year-old in their basement. We just can't take those voices seriously.